Okay, we're live.
All right. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Novi Public Library's Mental Health Series. I hope you've been following us for the last few sessions. We've had some really good ones, and it's going to be another exciting conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Once again, we have our very special guest, the series guest professional, Dr. Crystal Jackson, who is our licensed psychologist. Welcome once again, Dr. Jackson.
Hi, Gail. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
We made it to the fourth, the fourth live event on this series, this mental health series. Thank
Yes, we sure
you
did.
for always hosting us and allowing us to have really great topics to discuss.
Absolutely. And save this series the best for the last, even though it isn't the last, it's the last in this particular series. I'm saying that as we tease talking to Mr. Joe Lilly. He is a licensed social worker. He has his own practice. It's Lily Brook Counseling Service. Welcome. We're going to talk about man stress. So we brought the professional and personal side of it. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. And we're going to dive right in talking about it because man stress is a little different. We haven't talked about anything like this before. So I'm looking forward to some good, engaging conversations. If you do have questions, as usual, if you are on Facebook, you can type your question in the comment section. If you're on Zoom, you can type your question in the chat. And if you'd like to be anonymous, if you are on Zoom, you can type it anonymously. We have Katie, my coworker, who's handling the technology. She will facilitate questions from both ends. So if you type them in, we can ask your question then, okay? If question or comment. For those of you who are in Zoom, if you want to ask the question yourself, feel free to do that. You can let Katie know and we can unmute you, open up your video, and you can engage in whatever part of the conversation that you'd like. Let's start right off talking about man stress. We teased, I always pull out the flyer and see what we said we were going to talk about. We're going to learn how to recognize stress, admit that you have stress, the triggers, and how to get support. So let's maybe start off with recognizing man stress, and if it's a little different. Should I start off with you, Dr. Jackson, or should I let Joe take it?
I just first want to say thank you so much to Joe Lilly for agreeing to be on our series for tonight, especially. I look at Joe as, I don't know what he will say, but I look at him as an expert in this area. He has done a lot of work with men in particular with regards to psychotherapy and treatment. And so I would like to let Joe take the lead tonight for this series. Joe?
Yay.
Yay, huh? Good thing. Yeah, so I guess the first question is maybe I should start off with, is there a difference between man stress versus women stress? How about that?
So in general, I mean, if we're talking about stress generally, the answer is no, there's no difference. Stress is a psychological and biological response to what's going on in our lives. And as biological creatures, the body responds the same way: increased heart rate, butterflies in the stomach. Prolonged stress is, other, heart issues, maybe headaches, stomach aches, things like that. So the body's going to have its own response to acute stress, so a small situation, as well as chronic stress. And in that general term, it would be the same for men as it is for women. Now, when you look at it from the emotional perspective or even the behavioral perspective, stress is going to look very different between the genders.
How so? And when it comes to men?
Well, so if I can speak in stereotypes, and I'll probably bring up a few stereotypes throughout our time. I will try to stereotype men more than I do women. I feel like I can stereotype men. As a man, I feel like it's safe for me to stereotype myself. So generally speaking, men are through society are given permission to truly express one emotion, and that's anger. Now, anger can be expressed at varying degrees, and there's a cutoff where a man can be too angry, but the expectation overall is that men will show some level of strength or machismo when they're dealing with their emotions. Whereas, women, on the other hand, they are allowed to have a full range of emotions. They're not allowed to be too emotional, because then you're just whatever, you're emotional, you're crazy, you're, whatever you want to call it. But um, women through society have been given permission to have more emotions than men. So you will see men deal with most of their problems through some level of anger.
And wouldn't you say, I mean, I think that that really starts, Joe, would you agree that that starts really in childhood, right? The way in which even parents or caregivers, maybe even teachers or just other adults, the way adults in the child's life respond to their emotions starting at a very early age. And some of even the comments that may even be made about the child before the birth of the child.
Mm.
And again, I think it's important to say that when we have these discussions, we're talking generally, right? So we are
Yes.
making stereotypes. There's always exceptions because I believe that some people can hear these series comments, these series events that we have, and the comments that the professionals and I make. But keeping in mind that we're making these based on generalizations, research, studies that's been conducted. However, there are always exceptions, right? So I just want to always kind of toss that out there.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you said that. Without a doubt, there are exceptions to the rules. I have had men in my office that are very in tune with their emotions, very, very in touch with other people's emotions. They can empathize. They can problem solve. Anger is not their first response. So there's definitely exceptions to the rule. Um, but I think if we are looking through the conversation that we're having today, those generalizations, they come up. I mean, I would say if I could, do a statistical analysis in my head real quick, most of the men that I've seen throughout the course of my career would present in the way that we're going to talk about today with that anger response. And I would agree. It starts probably before birth. You find out that the gender during pregnancy, it's going to be a strong boy or it's going to be a pretty girl. And it really does start from there. And as they grow, the conditioning and everything else, the gender roles and gender stereotypes, they're presented either on purpose or by accident through society, through entertainment and media, through parenting, um, through peer interactions. The boy that cries after striking out in baseball goes back to the dugout, and the rest of the team starts to move away from him because nobody wants to be next to the boy who cries. Whereas the boy who walks off, after striking out and slams his helmet and his bat down and sits down, everybody comes to him and offers him support. So even through like interactions like that, we're conditioned to understand what is and is not okay.
Is that a reason why, even in the home, possibly being stereotypical again, why men tend to hide their stresses if they have them? Or do they even know that that's what it's identified as? Stress.
I think men would be terrible at identifying that it is stress or admitting that it is stress. From an early age, I don't think boys are good at saying, I'm scared, I'm hurt. They might say, I'm bleeding. But I remember growing up, I had a friend that we were outside playing and he cut himself and just bleeding all over the place. And he was more concerned about making sure nobody saw him cry and nobody thought he was actually injured to actually deal with a pretty nasty wound. So like men, we're pretty narrow-minded in how we deal with things. We're built to try to compartmentalize, and even in those situations we do. And so we do struggle to label things, I think, with a healthy and appropriate way.
Well,
Hey,
and
Joe,
then
I heard you. Mhm.
oh, I was
Go on,
going to
doctor.
say that I think at sometimes it is also perpetuated by sometimes the women. And so now, Joe, you mentioned that you'll just worry about stereotyping the men. So I will do the same we'll just tag team with this. Joe.
Works for me.
I think sometimes for women, you may find that in relationships, even sometimes women will use phrases if they happen to see the male in their life respond in a way that is considered soft, okay, for lack of a better phrase, or showing tears or crying or hurt feelings. I think sometimes the phrase sensitive is used and it's used in a very demeaning way. So then
Mhm.
again, it just reinforces this idea that it is not okay to express those type of emotions. And I think that's extremely problematic when really we should all be encouraging proper, right, expression of emotion so that we're able to properly or at least appropriately and in a healthy way deal with life stressors, because we all have them, men and women. We
Mhm.
have these stressors, we have emotional responses. Even we were talking about men, but I also feel like for women sometimes the phrase, I know I've heard this a lot in sessions, women will say, well, I'm very emotional.
Mhm.
My husband is not emotional, but I'm really emotional. And my statement to those women, and even if I talk to men and they describe their wives as being emotional, I have to take a moment to clarify and say that we actually all are emotional. And I will make it a point to help the man understand that he too has emotions. However, the expression of those emotions just may look differently, right?
Yes.
They present in a way that's different than maybe his wife presents or maybe his daughter presents.
Yes. And a man's prone to repress. So, a grieving man, you would may find him not crying. You may find him unreasonably okay, and it's because he's literally swallowing it down, compartmentalizing. I've throughout, forever, men's brains are like waffles. They got little compartments for the little different things. And, while I am visible to other human beings, I'm going to put it all together and nobody's going to know. But maybe when I go home, that's when I'm going to let out my stress. I might be more angry. I might be more irritable, or really, I'll withdraw. I'm fine. Leave me alone. I might spend time outside by myself, really disengaging from human contact. But I'm never going to just sit down and cry. I'm not going to look at someone and say, I hurt so bad. I'm so sad. That's just not something that men are prone to doing. It's actually, like, sometimes it's physically repulsive to even try to say those things out loud. I've worked with men where I've tried to, in my office, just say that it hurts. You lost someone important to you. Say that it hurts, and they'll just stare at me and I can't.
Mhm. So then what should women do? I'm sure women probably mess things up big time when it comes to the men and their stress, don't they? This whole thing is going to be stereotypical, so just prepare yourself. We're going to do that the whole time.
Well,
So
we'll
what happens
stereotype
when,
couples too.
yeah, let's do it. What happens when the woman nags, the man on and on, express yourself. Why are you expressing yourself? And tell me your feelings. We often hear that all the time. Is this the wrong thing to do, or what is the correct way of getting the man to express what he's really feeling?
I think I'm sure Joe will have something to add to this question as well. But I think when you asked about women, I would say that for women, sometimes we like to think that if people don't respond the way that we respond, then their response is like wrong, right? Or
I would say the same is
and
true for
even
men,
and
though.
even the even
Mm.
the even the idea of having dialogue. Okay, so I'm going to specifically talk about just talking about it. So maybe um, a woman is more prone to speak openly and freely at the drop of a dime about any subject matter, any pain, any hurt. And because she recognizes that there was a life event that she believes is hurtful or may be hard or challenging for a man in her life, whether it's a father, a brother, a husband, a boyfriend, whoever it may be, a child, even, and trying to push or trying to pull, become a dentist, as I say, and trying to pull and extract those emotions out of the man in her life can oftentimes backfire because maybe it's done prematurely, right? Not to say it will never come out, but it may not come out when she thinks it should, and it may not come out the way she thinks it should. Right now, and when I say the way, I'm not saying if there is violence involved, that's okay and she should be okay with that. I'm not going to that extreme. I'm just simply saying that maybe he's not going to come out and start crying right away about this life changing, very sad or tragic event, maybe he's going to come out and express his emotions a different way. But I think it's so important that women understand that for the men in their lives to respond differently when they do choose to respond, it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Hmm.
I think
Well,
women feel.
mhm.
Go ahead, Gail.
No, you're fine. I want to hear you.
Okay. 'Cause I think women feel and men fix. So whereas a woman is comfortable, not necessarily comfortable, that might not be the right word. I don't think anybody's really comfortable with negative emotions, but they're capable of feeling those emotions. They're capable of processing those emotions. They're capable of dialoguing those emotions. Men want to fix it. So when she's upset, whatever the reason it's upset, he's looking for how to fix it. He's coming home with flowers and chocolate and trying to figure out what's on the to-do list or whatever else. You know, he's doing extra laundry or doing the dishes because he's trying to fix whatever emotion she's feeling, but she just needs to feel it. And I think part of the complication is men expect women to just fix it, and women expect men to feel it, and we don't. That's just, it's like speaking a different language. It's like asking someone who speaks German to start speaking English. It's just not going to happen.
So I
It's
guess
going to
the
take a
added
lot of
stress
training.
comes from the man. The man stress is increased when he can't feel it or fix it. Is that right?
Yes, well, without a doubt.
Hmm. I did a little research looking up some of the top reasons for man stress, and I saw finances, work, women, children, health, and expectations. Um, am I about right? Are there more to add, or does anyone want to talk about any of the above?
I'm actually going to tell you what I put down on my list: work, family, providing and protecting, social comparison, and then I figured it was relevant, the COVID-19 pandemic, because I think it's a good umbrella for all of those things.
For
So
sure.
it sounds like our list is pretty similar.
Mhm.
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 Especially now during this time, I would imagine increased stress for everyone. But if the man is the breadwinner, or in the one days it used to be head of the house, you don't necessarily
Right.
call it that, but often men still feel that responsibility, that they're the one who has to hold things together for the home. I
Yes.
feel like, this just comes from generation to generation. How much stress, how much contributing factor is stress with that? Just the
I,
whole idea of having to be the one to hold it together.
I think it's big. Again, being that protector, that provider, that breadwinner, if you will, it's part of a man's identity. And to fail at it in any measurement of failure would definitely increase a man's stress. So if I'm unhappy at work, I don't enjoy my job, I'm not bringing home enough money, or money's tight, um, any one reason we would measure ourselves as failure is likely to increase our stress level.
Well, and I think that's a good point, Joe, because what you just said was that that's something that comes up internally. It
Yes.
doesn't even take anyone externally to say or bring attention to anything. That's something that is felt internally. So, going back to the role of women in men's lives, I think sometimes because women, we are naturally, I think, and generally speaking, very big on communication. Oftentimes, we feel the need to communicate what we are seeing and what is what is being experienced, and sometimes we find it necessary to bring up what the man is already feeling anyway. How many times have we heard women say, "Oh, you're supposed to be the man. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. Oh, well, can you man up?" How many times have we heard that phrase, right,
Absolutely.
being used so often? And when things are not going well in their role, in their minds, or even in the woman's experience as the man, for the man being a provider, that woman communicating that in a way that is not being empathetic or not validating the man's own experience of using the phrase that Joe used, this failure, this feeling of failure, it just amplifies the issue, right? And again, it just
Right.
further reinforces all of these different stereotypes
Yes.
that are held for men, and it adds that pressure, and it adds to the expectations. So those things that you mentioned on the list, it just adds and magnifies, those issues that are already innately a part of most men's concerns.
Yeah. And depending on a man's level of ego strength will also determine, how quickly or in what ways he measures that failure, as well as like whom he's interacting with. Maybe he's got a strong father figure who feels that he's not doing enough, right? That right there is going to be a huge level of failure. When the wife points out a something that she doesn't like or something that needs to be changed, or points out that room that hasn't been finished, they were supposed to paint it months ago, things like that, I think really do poke right into that ego strength, and a man with a lesser ego strength is easier to start to experience that stress more quick, and the anger response will start to come out with that.
So Joe, I'm going to ask you a question because you just mentioned something not being done. So I would imagine, and because of my experience in talking with women, I love these conversations when they come up in therapy sessions, and even family members, when there's a conversation about, well, so I'm just supposed to accept it. So I can't say anything because it's going to hurt his feelings. So what I receive oftentimes from women is this level of frustration and irritation that they feel as if they cannot say anything, otherwise they are damaging the ego or they're causing him to have his feelings hurt, which then frustrates them. And it's kind of like this cycle where it's like, oh, well, he's not tough, he can't handle this, so I can't say anything. So anytime anything's wrong, I just can't say anything. I just have to accept it.
But wouldn't you say, Dr. Crystal, there is a time that you do just need to shut up?
So
As
here,
hard as it is to say, as hard as it is to hear it, doesn't that help sometimes?
I think it does, but what does Joe say about the women when they have this extreme
Hmm.
right view, right? Because what we know is that any extreme thought is typically problematic, right? So
Right.
anytime we're saying I can never say anything, right? Every time I say something, right? When we start using these absolute phrases, we're not giving room for any exception at all.
Right. Well, I honestly, I think the other side of the coin is really very similar. Where I speak with a ton of men that come in and they're angry, they're frustrated. Well, my wife says I need to talk to a therapist because I'm always angry, and it comes down to the relationship dynamics and things going on in the home, and there are things that he is judging her for that are undone, or she talks to me this way, but it's really the same thing. And so I think it comes down to the fact that, again, men and women tend to speak a different language when it comes to that communication, and it comes to emotions, and trying to teach each individual how to communicate with their spouse, or whomever it might be, with their children, with their parents, teaching them how to communicate the way they communicate, speaking in the same language. So some of the things that we really work on are like the 5 love languages. I work a lot on like collaborative problem solving, so that they identify the same problem versus picking problems in each other. When they're working on a common goal, they're less likely to fight about it. When they're picking on each other, then they're likely to defend themselves. So I really try to shape the conversation and the dialogue. And so whether if I'm working with a man in my office, I'm trying to teach him how to understand and how to communicate with his wife differently, not as a man, but as a husband, as someone that's actually interested in hearing her perspective, not just fixing the problems, not just doing things his way.
Mhm. So how do we address this? Is there anything when we talk about some of the differences, we've acknowledged, how the expression of emotions can be different. So if we're dealing with, or a man is challenged with expressing his emotions in a way that's maybe more appropriate. And when I say more appropriate, that's going based on the premise that maybe there is extreme anger, maybe there is yelling in the home or yelling at other people, even if there is no wife involved at all, right?
Mhm.
It could just be at work, it could be with family members, it could be with children. It could be in any other form, even outside of a relationship with a spouse or a significant other. What do you recommend? How do we get men? What do you use? What interventions do you use, or strategies do you try to teach to get them to that point of being more comfortable with expressing themselves, and maybe, can I use the phrase, non-threatening ways? Right? Because sometimes the yelling and that intense anger can become very, off-putting and threatening.
Well, let me start with, I guess I'll start here. When it comes to like treatment or whatever else, you wanna recognize, are there impairments in a person's life? Social, occupational, academic, physical health, overall affective distress, and things of that sort. Are if those impairments are there and you're seeing that, so maybe they don't have a significant other, but they've been fired from 3 jobs, or they're always late, or their productivity is terrible. That's telling me that there's a problem there, and that's suggesting that maybe they need to go get some help and talk to someone. So I think we want to look at that. The other thing is, when I'm working with families and working with individuals, I kind of give them a list of things to look out for, and it's to prioritize needs. Safety is the first one, health is the second one, how people are getting along with others is the third one. Then I would go into academics, and then work, chores, things of that sort. And so we're also wanting to analyze and assess, are those problems in existence? So is this anger problem, is it a safety issue? Is this where the person themselves or the people around them, are they unsafe? If they're unsafe, then we need to deal with that safety problem first. If it's just a health problem, is this a person that's, they're so angry that they have high blood pressure, they have, you know, uh, other heart issues, or whatever else. Maybe they even have diabetes because they're not taking care of themselves. We want to deal with those health issues, and then on down the list. So I start with kind of working there, working my way towards the things that truly matter. When it comes to the relationships, in an ideal situation, I bring both parties into the room, and I work with them and teaching them how to talk to each other. So they have that third party person there, and I can say, whoa, stop, don't, no, that's not how you want to say that. I hear you saying this, and I would like you to say it this way to her right now. And we walk through it together until they can actually do it on their own.
I have one question, and it says, isn't it true that marriage exposes issues that were there before?
I think you're kind of asking about the chicken and the egg. I think the marriage can expose issues that were there before, and um, I think you can go the other way. I think marriage can cause issues, and so on and so forth. It's
Cause issues that were never there?
absolutely. Marriage is complicated. It's a wonderful thing, but it's super complicated. You're taking two individuals, and combining them into one cohesive unit. Um, you're dealing with family of origin from two different people. You're dealing with different cultures, different upbringings. So many different variables are at play. So, a person that was more or less, well going into the marriage, may develop other mental health struggles. I don't want to say because of the marriage, but when you factor in the different levels and variables and different complications that come into it, yeah, the adjusting and adapting to a significant life event can be very, very hard.
That is
I
good
would
to say, and this isn't a marriage counseling session, but touching on that is important, especially if there are people listening who are newly married, and they have certain expectations, and then they're in a complete shock when they actually get married. You learn, the man or the woman, either side.
Mhm.
So that is important. Dr. Crystal, were you about to say something?
I was really just going to say that I agree 100% that yes, people, to answer the person's question, the answer is yes. But I think that the word "and" has to be attached to it, which is what Joe was doing, and then saying, yes, it is true, and new problems can develop after the onset of the marriage, right? Or once married, issues that were not pre-existing. And I think that if that is something that's of a concern, where things are coming into the marriage and it's becoming a bigger issue, and again, it doesn't have to be marriage, it could be any life-changing event, right? Any significant life event, transitioning from one state to the next, right? Transitioning from one job to another job, or transitioning in the same company, but just from one position to another position. So any type of change, any type of significant life change, the birth of a child, the loss of a child, right? All these things, these are things that would happen. Not they weren't, clearly they weren't pre-existing, especially like in the example of transitioning from one job to the next, because now you're dealing with different coworkers, management level, having a child or the loss of a child. None of that was pre-existing, so you didn't bring that into the marriage. That was something that occurred after the marriage. So I think that it's important that we don't try to necessarily or always say that these issues were with the person ahead of time, right? And because in essence, when we do that, we can unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, depending on who you're dealing with, but
Mhm.
I would think oftentimes unintentionally cause or create blame, right? This, when now we're trying to blame, right, the person's family or their upbringing, right? So yes, it is relevant, but it's not always the case, right? Where it is the reason why the person is responding this way.
And
Part
I
two
think
of that
blame,
question.
I think blame
Go
is
on, Joe.
dangerous because it absolves oneself of their role and their responsibility in the change process. Even if blame is 100% appropriate to blame someone else, he stepped out and had an affair. You can absolutely blame a person for that. But if you are committed to recovering from that moment, then blaming him for that is not going to get you any better. It's going to hold you in a position of hurt and defensiveness. So I think blame is just super dangerous. And as Dr. Jackson is saying, you don't want to look into that. You want to look at what you can do going forward to create change, as opposed to looking into the past and blaming.
So I have a question on that part. Is stating a fact the same as blaming? We're probably digressing into something else, because I heard you say something like, if you've had an affair about whatever, just talk about fixing it. But don't
Well,
you address, which could be called blame or state a
there
fact? What's the
there's a
difference?
difference between fact and emotional accuracy. And um, when we're talking about blame, we're talking about this, we're talking about relationships. Sometimes stating that fact is irrelevant and unnecessary because it's unproductive. It's not going to make the relationship better. It's not going to make the situation change.
This is
It
going to
is
be
what
a
it
fun
is.
conversation, because my question is, stating a fact of an affair. I'd love to get into this with you, Joe. Isn't
Well,
this fun? Stating the fact of an affair, and I haven't even experienced it before, but I mean, just talking about the resolution without actually acknowledging the situation, are you saying
no.
skip that
So
part?
no, not completely. We are assuming that that's already known, right?
Right.
We're assuming like we're in session and we're talking about it, and party A and party B already knows about the affair. So we're not pretending like it didn't happen. We're not trying to ignore it. But for party A to just to continuously, well, they had an affair, they had an affair, they had an affair. Like, it's irrelevant at this point. Are we going to fix this? Are we going to work on moving forward? Or are we going to continue to live in the past with the hurt?
I
Mhm.
think, and I understand from that point, because in therapy, what the goal is always to get the person to heal from the past, and to help them move forward, right? So whenever there has been injury or hurt, trauma, damage of any type, yes, there is acknowledgement, but acknowledgement is different than perseveration,
Yes.
right? So to perseverate and just kind of stay there, and you're stuck
Mhm.
there and you're not able to move forward. As therapists, our goal is not to leave you there, and not to act as if it's okay for you to stay there, because we know that that perseveration is just unhealthy, right? It's not fruitful. It's
Right.
not getting you where you really want to go, right? So
Mhm.
the example of a relationship, if a man wants to, because it can work both ways, right? So you can have infidelity on the side of the man being unfaithful, you can have infidelity on the side of the woman being unfaithful. But whenever that happens, you must at some point make a decision as to what you're going to do. Either you're going
Mhm.
to dissolve the relationship because you don't believe that you can recover, or you're going to decide to stay. And so if the decision is to stay, then we cannot perseverate on the event that happened. We must help you to move forward in order for it to be fruitful, in order for it to really benefit your marriage. So I think that's really what the goal is, and it's again, it's not to not acknowledge, but it's not to perseverate either.
Right. And,
Got
and
it.
taking that point, and I appreciate that, Dr. Jackson, that's a very good point. But taking it back onto this idea of man stress, it's really a similar strategy that I have when I'm working with men to try to just very logically process through things. You're making a decision. You have control over the actions that you take and the decisions that you make. So what are we going to focus on? You know, as a man, we're very narrow-minded, we're fixed, right? Let's put this in a very, very concrete box that we can work with so that we can move forward with it. Because dwelling in the emotion, which men aren't good at, we don't have any practice actually processing the emotions that we have. So let's try to separate emotion and logic, and then we can actually weed through those two different things, because now we got different compartments that we can work with.
Would you say, Joe, that for, even though men, of course we all have emotion,
Yes.
men have the emotion, but they don't necessarily use that type of terminology in their day-to-day life. They don't use the same words that maybe a woman would use to explain how they feel. So even when it comes to parenting, right? So the approach that's used in parenting for a man, how would you say it's different than what you know about your experience in treatment with women, with moms? How would you say that even that looks different? I know we've talked about relationships. What about men and their interactions with children?
So let me start with you've gone to the hardware store to pick out paint, right? How many different color palettes are available in that paint section? Countless, right?
Too many.
Too many, right? A woman's emotions are like that color palette at the hardware store, and she's aware of those different emotions, right? Whereas a man, they've got primary colors. So we don't have canary, we have yellow. You know, there's no burgundy, it's red. And so our emotional experiences are not nearly as in depth as what a woman's experiences are, because we don't do it. The brain is designed differently. A female brain, structurally speaking, is smaller than a male brain. So it's built more like a race car, and it's built for multitasking and speed and all these other things. And because of that, one of the things that comes out of it is your women tend to be more in tune with their emotions. Men's brains are bigger. Our creator knew that we were going to be dumber and needed more protection, so he gave us extra gray matter. So it slows us down. It makes us compartmentalize. It makes us different. We're built more like a truck. We're built rugged, and it changes how we think and process. So in terms of dealing with each other in relationship or with our children, we teach what we know, right? Our parents are who they are, and that's from who they came from, and it comes down. So there's nature and nurture in all of that affects what's going to happen in every moment of our life.
And
We
when
have a
you
few
talk
questions
about,
here when I get to this one. Go on,
I
go
would,
on, Doctor.
I was just going to say, when you talk about the brain development, I would say that also goes back to how we are raised, right? Because I like to say or explain that our brain, essentially it conforms around our environment, right? So yes, there is biology that's there, but the other part of that, and these neural pathways and neurotransmitters that's making these connections, it's happening around our environment, right?
Yes.
So based on how we are being raised and what we're being taught, right, at an early age, it's really hard when a person becomes an adult to really undo. It's possible, but it's definitely much more challenging to undo what was done in childhood, because the brain is not as pliable as we get older as it was when we were younger, right?
Right. Can't teach
I'm
an
going
old
to
dog
skip
new tricks.
to a question here. I think it relates to how you were raised. I need to put it on it. It says, broken parents create broken children. who brings that brokenness into adult relationships? Isn't it important to deal with the original brokenness with or without a counselor?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Um, but
100% accurate.
it's not a guarantee though. I mean,
Right.
um, there's predisposition to just about everything, and you know, individuals who come from a broken home are more likely to bring that brokenness forward with them. But if they do the work with a counselor, without a counselor, spiritually, however they choose to heal, if they've done the healing, that brokenness does not have to go with them.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
It's not a guarantee. I think that's something that's important for the person that asks the question and even other people who are listening, because when, just because one person asks a question, I'm sure there's many of the other people that may have the same question as well. There are no guarantees, right? There are just no guarantees. We all have, as Joe mentioned, predispositions, right, to do certain things. Sometimes it takes the environment to bring it out. It takes certain scenarios to actually, happen in order for certain things to be manifested. However, we know that, for an example, a person who is engaging in unhealthy eating, yes, they have a higher probability, right, or higher chance of developing certain types of diseases. However, there is no guarantee that that would happen. That's just based on science, right? A person can smoke and never develop lung cancer. Now, are they probably at a higher risk? Those people who do, yes, we know
No
that
doubt.
research shows that. But again, it just using just those as examples of the fact that there are no guarantees. So it's not to say that a person who has been hurt, going back to the question that was asked, a person who has been hurt, it does not mean that they will absolutely 100% certainly hurt their children or someone else in their family just because they were hurt at a younger age.
Another question here. We been talking about marriages so much. There was a question posed. What is the difference for you in counseling single people, but single men? Well, let's keep it in the conversation of men. Some can't even relate to the marriage aspect at all. So, what do you see with men, maybe clients or just in general, in terms of stress?
Is there a clarification to that? I feel like I need a little bit more to be able to answer it.
I think it's just saying many of the stresses that we talked about for men related to family life or spouse or children, their wife, but there are many men that are dealing with stress that are not married at all. Do you see that? And what are their stresses?
You know what? I
Oh,
would say the
go ahead,
stresses
Chris.
are very similar, right? Just take out children and take out a spouse, but you still have family stress. You still have financial stress. You still have work related stress. So you still have those expectations that are placed on men, including single men, whether that stress is from family. And when I speak of family at this point, we're not talking about there being a spouse or children involved, just parents, right?
Right.
Siblings, right? It could be that compare and contrast that may be happening where a man is looking at a friend and the friend is or the friend is doing X, Y, and Z, and the other male is comparing himself to his friend, right? So even to compare, all of those things are still there, even with men when they are single and they're not married and there are no children involved. And that expectation is so huge. So I think going beyond the question that was asked is how do you help when you have these when you have a person who comes into therapy or you have a conversation with the person, because we know not everyone comes into therapy, but when you have a person who has these expectations, whether they were expectations that were imposed upon them, whether they are just self-imposed or a mixture of the two, which I think is more likely a mixture of the two. How do you help a man to create reasonable expectations for themselves, especially when you have the images and social life and media out here that typically portrays a man in a certain light with these expectations that we're talking about, how do you help a man that comes into session deal with creating reasonable and appropriate expectations of themselves?
So I want to piggyback a little bit off of what you said. Though there is a common response to stress, the biological stuff that we talked about at the beginning, stress itself is very subjective. So what is stressful to one person is not necessarily stressful to another. So one of the things that we want to that I'm going to do in session is to truly identify what it is, what are the stressors, what is this person dealing with, their unique situation and circumstances. It might be family, it might be social comparison. There are different forms of stress. There's positive stress, which is stress that helps you grow and change, like going to school. You know, everybody remembers, you know, that midterm or that final exam. You know, then there's planned and unplanned stress. You know, if you know it's coming, you prepare for it ahead of time. If it's an abrupt and a sudden thing, it's completely different. And negative stress, you know, stress that makes the activities of daily living much harder. So what I'm going to do with a man at any age, if they're 5 or if they're 50, I'm going to basically do the same thing, and I'm going to try to identify exactly what it is that's creating a disturbance in their life. I'm going to help them define what that disturbance is and what that problem actually is. It's not for me to define. A spouse, a parent, a teacher, nobody else gets to define that. So I help them tell me what their problem is. You know, a 5-year-old's problem is, well, my brother keeps taking my toys. A 50-year-old's problem is, you know, my neighbor has a boat and I want one. You know, there's different things. Excuse me, I apologize. And so from there, we're going to work on a concrete a treatment plan, you know, obviously using different levels and different approaches within therapy. We're going to work on changing thoughts. We're going to work on change the way you think, change the way you feel. So we're going to work on ultimately, what do they have control over, which is themselves. So we're going to set small, very achievable goals. People question me because I tell them, set your bar low. Anytime you're working on your expectations, set the bar low. Your expectations are something that you believe are a guarantee. Well, your guarantees should be guaranteed. So set that bar low so that you're guaranteed to make it. Put your hopes way up high. Aim high, always aim high, but set that bar low so that you can at least have that victory. And then we'll continue to jump from one bar to the next bar as we work our way up to accomplishing the ultimate goal, which is their health, their healing, their recovery.
So really, Joe, pulling all of that together and kind of bringing in what we talked about earlier, we're really looking at, yes, identifying what is considered a stress or stressor to the men that we work with in their words, right? In their eyes, not based on what we are saying or someone else is saying to them, but what do they identify as stressors for themselves? And then what is the level of impairment?
Yes.
Right? Because that's always key. You mentioned that. What is the level of impairment? And then going into kind of keeping in line with the idea that men are more focused on fixing, right? So you talk about the goal setting and being very almost like a strategic planning type of arrangement versus maybe for women, my approach may be different, right? We may do more of like exploration of things. We kind of go over the narrative that they're playing and these other narratives and all these other levels of impact. Whereas for men, the approach and treatment may be much more strategic.
Absolutely. It's not to say that we wouldn't do some of that exploration. There are definitely times where I work to try to get them to a point where we can start to label what they feel or label what they experience in emotional terms. You know, that sounds like grief. That sounds like betrayal. That sounds like frustration. Because again, and I'm speaking in large generalizations, but the real common pattern is a woman calls and says, my wife needs therapy, or my husband needs therapy. Sorry. He's so angry. And then she can convince him to go to an appointment, and he'll say something like, okay, I'll go in one time, one appointment. I'm only talking to you once. And then he says, well, I'm here because my wife wants me to be here. She says I'm really, really angry. And it's just a simple, tell me more about that anger. When you get to talking about it, behind closed doors, if you can get him to actually say it, he's going to tell you about the things that are stressing him out. Maybe it's her, maybe it's work. If it's a single man, it's not, maybe it's a million different things. Maybe there is trauma or abuse from family of origin, and he's going to start talking about those things, and then we start to label them. We have questionnaires and other surveys and other things that we can put names and visual references to what they're experiencing, and we can normalize it and make it real. And by doing that, we now give a tangible, concrete thing that can be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that
What can we
situation,
say?
thinking, I'm thinking about what has happened. So in therapy, we see a multitude of different groups of people, um, ethnic groups. As a person in your position, Joe, how do you deal with a Black man coming into your office and discussing the stress that is felt right now in our country with regards to how he views himself and maybe some of the things that he's been witnessing? I know as a female, I've received so many more men. I think I said this in another series, another program, that I've been seeing an influx of an increase of men, of Black males coming in. And I think historically, as therapists, we know that they are one of the hardest groups to really get to come in. I mean, I think if we had to create, this kind of hierarchy of who's, more or less likely to come into therapy, I think generally speaking, again, using stereotypes here, Black men would be definitely at the lower end of the spectrum, right?
Mhm.
But I know that for me, at least this past year, I've seen so many more. So how do you respond to something like that? Because we have all types of people that come to us, and I would imagine that this has been something that has probably come up.
Mhm. I would have to start with agreeing that I the Black male is probably the population I see the absolute least.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's Black men do not come in for therapy very often. But through I try to understand through them. I won't sit here and pretend for a second to understand what it's like to be a Black male in America. I have no idea. And I'm very clear and very open about that, and I start there. I expect a Black male to teach me about his experience so that I can understand his experience, and then we can talk about his experience. Um, uh, only he knows. So validation for me becomes, the primary tool.
And I
Is,
think
is
that,
sometimes that's all that's needed, just sometimes from the Black man, for even if it's a counselor, to listen to their feelings. Sometimes that helps, even if you don't have the answer, or try to answer and explain what it is if you really don't have the answer. The listening ear and empathy, does that come into play then?
I think that matters for everybody, and I can't speak for the Black male, but I imagine through a population, a person that's been marginalized for so often, that to have someone to actually hear them probably would mean a lot.
Well, and I know Joe as an excellent therapist, and I think I asked that question because I think it's important, because we don't know who is a part of our listening audience, right? We can't see faces, we don't know skin color, we don't know ethnic groups. We're live on Facebook, so we don't know who all is listening. And what I think is so important is that when you are connected, sometimes you have groups of people that prefer other therapists that look like them. But I think it's so important for them to hear another therapist who does not look like them, hear that therapist say, listen, you're teaching me, right? I'm here to listen to your experience, right? I am here to validate. I am here to empathize. I am here to listen, right? And so hearing a person who does not look like you take that type of non-judgmental stance and position is so incredibly important. And so that's why I asked that question, because I know Joe as a therapist, as a coworker, and I think that it is so important that other people hear, because sometimes we, even in our own ethnic group as African Americans, we can start to create stereotypes as well, right? Based on experience. But it's so important to know that not everyone fits the stereotypes that we have either. Right. And so there
Right.
are people that are willing to listen that may not look like you, who are willing to say that they validate, right? They acknowledge, you know, what you have experienced and what you have gone through. I just think it's so important when we're talking about men in particular and people coming into therapy and receiving treatment.
We do have some more questions, but I do want to make sure we address how you deal with stress and maybe some steps. Every stress doesn't mean, okay, go see a counselor. Are there incremental steps that say, okay, first you recognize, even if it's that person or someone else in their family that recognizes it in the man, what should you do first on the onset of noticing stress through either your spouse or any male person in your life?
The
Is
first
there
step,
something? Yeah.
the first step is the hardest one, which is admitting it. Admitting that I need help, admitting that I'm overwhelmed, admitting that I am stressed. Again, being stereotypically male, we don't like to admit to any form of perceived weakness. So that admission of challenge is the hardest but necessary first step. From there, no, you don't have to go seek out help, just because you're stressed. Um, Self-care is really, really important and probably the first place to start. So where possible, exercising, getting, the right amount of sleep. So about 8 hours if you can. Um, eating better. I'm not, you don't got to eat just spinach and kale and drink water, but maybe cut down on the fast food a little bit. Things like that. Definitely drink more water. But so I think that is probably the first place. But the easy or the simple answer is to do anything that puts you in a position where you feel like you're controlling what happens next. Whenever we feel like we have that sense of control, it reduces our stress.
Mhm.
So if there is, I'm going to mention several different stressors, right? So if there is financial stress, if there is, you mentioned, you touched on health related stress, if there is work related stress, what you're saying is one of the strategies that a person can do even outside of therapy, right, is to consider, okay, not only what is my stress, but what about this situation am I in control of? And then after you identify what you are in control, I think, can I also say this? I think it's also important to identify what you're not in control of, right? So you
Yeah.
don't spin your wheels and spend your time trying to deal with that and it's outside of your control, because that is, again, I used the word earlier, it's unfruitful. It's not beneficial to do that. So identifying what you don't have control over and then identifying what you do have control over, Joe, and then you're saying once you identify what you do have control over, then step 3, right? So we have acknowledgement of the stress, we have the type of stress, and then what we have control over. And then we're saying, okay, so now how can I impact this? What can I do? Right? I have control over these areas. So now how will I choose to impact or to affect my control?
Yes.
Or to exert my control is a better word, right?
Yes.
How can I exert my control over these areas that I've just identified?
Yes. And in that, there's going to be tough decisions. Sometimes it's not as simple as, okay, I'm just going to wake up a half hour earlier and get on the treadmill. If you're talking about financial stress, your general, analysis is I either need to make more or spend less. So the idea of that, what can I control? Well, I cannot necessarily control how much I make. I have a salary. I go to work. I don't have the option of overtime. Maybe it's pandemic related. I don't even have a job right now. It could be a number of different things. So the only thing I have control over in this sense is where my money is going. So what can I cut? Where can I save? hard decisions would have to be made. And even in that situation, there's going to be stress. That's stressful trying to figure that out. But it really does change our outlook, which changes our stress level when we can say, okay, I have control. I can get rid of cable. I don't have to have cable. I have to have internet because my kids have to have school right now. But so I can't get rid of cable, but I can get rid of internet. I can cut back on the Starbucks. I can do, whatever it is, and I'm talking about luxuries with Starbucks and cable. Some people aren't choosing between luxuries. You're choosing between, your light bill and your groceries. But, at the same time, you make a choice. Nobody makes that choice for you. You make a choice. And that changes your outlook. From there too, you have the power to call different, DTE or consumers, and what programs do they have? So you can make the effort to look into resources and so on and so forth. And that can change, it doesn't eliminate the trigger. It doesn't eliminate the stressor. It doesn't eliminate the problem, but it puts you closer to the driver's seat over how to create change. Does that make sense?
It does.
Sure,
And depending
absolutely.
on how difficult those choices are, that may be what leads a person into therapy, right?
Absolutely.
Not just the mere difficulty of it, but putting themselves in a position of being able to garner assistance through a therapist, right? To help them work through those tough decisions. Especially, I like that you gave a very real example of choosing between food and lights, right? And you're right, that's not an easy decision, right? Food or a roof over my head, right? So sometimes those are really, people are actively going through those decisions, have gone through those decisions. People will go through those decisions in the future. And going through that sometimes it's very scary. Oftentimes it's very scary, right?
Absolutely.
Especially if you've never been in that situation before, and especially if you have children, right? So you have some men who are single dads, right? So, and when people are in these positions and these life situations come up and they catch us off guard, we talked about things that we can plan for, and then things that are unplanned. The unplanned always creates more stress.
Absolutely.
But having a person as a therapist to work through that with a man, right, it can oftentimes be much more helpful than the man trying to figure it out alone because they feel as if they have to because they're a man.
They have to be strong.
They have to be
Yes.
strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Cannot get help. I was raised, right? Some men say you don't accept help from anyone, right?
Right. And one of the
I have another.
best predictors of positive outcome is relationship, whether that relationship be with a therapist or developing a support network. So reaching out and having strength in numbers, having support, feeling like you fit into a group, even if it's a group of people struggling, you feel like you belong, and that changes things too.
And Joe, you mentioned the word relationship, and we do have a diverse audience here. I want to talk a little bit about spirituality, Christian, godly principles, whatever you want to call, and it pairs with one of the questions that we have here. It says, how important to healing men is a relationship with a forgiving, loving God? So for those people who rely on God for their strength and God to suppress stress, can we speak on that? How does it pair with, dealing with stress or seeing a counselor for men in particular?
Well, speaking as a Christian and not a theologian, I think God is the answer. God is everything. God, he is the strength that we don't have. He is the answer. Unfortunately, we are limited and he is not. So our understanding is challenged, and trying to develop our relationship in God, in Christ, can actually add to our stress because we're looking for help. We're desperate for change, whatever it might be. And it's coming in God's time and not our time. So I think that can be very challenging. But as you work through your faith and as you study God and his love for you and his word, and you start to connect to that. For me, speaking just personally, not even professionally, for me, it starts to eliminate the level of hopelessness, the level of this is never going to change. I believe that there's something bigger and better going to happen. I believe that this struggle has meaning. I believe that God will create good from this trial, that I will, in the end, be shaped and better because I've gone through this.
Should a person who's relying on God and Christian values and Christian principles feel guilty for seeking out professional help, such as a counselor? Does it seem like they are turning away from their dependence on God?
I
No,
would say
because
absolutely
I
not.
believe God gave us
Coming
counselors.
from asking counselors that, right?
I would say absolutely not. 100% not. I think that goes to this kind of dichotomous way of thinking that it has to be either or, like it's all or nothing. Like either I have faith in God and I do that and I stick with that and I do nothing else, right? I think that that is a flawed way of thinking, because through relationship, even with other humans, it can be beneficial, right, and helpful. And so a person does not have to forego their faith in order to attend therapy as well, right? So it doesn't, the reverse doesn't have to be true. Okay, so if I, attend therapy, then I have nothing to do with God, right? I stop believing in God altogether, because now I'm just, going to therapy and receiving services through my therapist or my counselor. So it can be both, right? So sometimes therapy, you're able to bring in your belief and your faith into the therapy session. Listen, as therapists, it is our job to identify whatever the person, to utilize whatever the person identifies as a healthy strength for them, something that's healthy, something that is not illegal, right? So we can,
Right.
I had to say that, right? Because some people will say, well, this
Right.
is helpful, right? But we may not be able to support that. But I think when it is something like that, we can absolutely bring that in and make that a part of their treatment plan, and make that a part of what we utilize as strategies and resources that they can use to support them in their journey towards healing.
I want to make sure I get this question in because it seems pretty specific. And it says, how should a man approach a wife who will no longer work in healthcare now? When she was working in healthcare prior to COVID-19, the house expenses was depending on two income. She does not have COVID. So it seems like they were working, and because maybe because of COVID, they are no longer working in healthcare, but it reduced the income in half, or the expenses are now, still there.
That's
How
a
do you address
really
that?
specific question.
Yeah, how should a man address, what do you say to that?
I mean,
It
Or
seems
maybe I can rephrase it to say, how can
Yeah.
a man deal with income being sliced in half? What do you say to a family with coping mechanisms when your income is drastically reduced?
it seems to me that question is coming from a place of frustration within the home about the wife no longer working in healthcare, right? So it's not just that she's not working in
Hmm.
healthcare. It's a source of frustration now, it seems like, the way the question was phrased. And so
Possibly.
I would say the very first step is, for the question was about what should the man do. So I would say the first step is to understand from his wife's perspective why she chose to stop working in healthcare. Now, receiving the information does not mean that the husband will even agree. I
Right.
think that's important, right?
Right.
But that is not the reason for asking the question. The reason for asking the question is so that the husband has greater insight,
Right.
right? And it can
Yeah.
help him understand his wife better.
Yeah.
Doesn't
I
matter.
would.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, I would completely agree with what you're saying. I think in those tough situations, the easy thing is to see and think and try to fix it from our perspective, when the more likelihood of a positive, mutually satisfying resolution is to actually come over to the other side and understand it from the other perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then with that, once there is understanding, I think then we go to, okay, so in a marriage, do we ever want our spouse to do something that makes them uncomfortable? Whatever it is, right? Like, is that ever the goal? So the statement may be from the husband, okay, no, but we need money, right? Like we
Right.
have to pay bills, we have things, we this is the way we were always set up, and now it's different. And I can't do it on my own. This was not our agreement. Sometimes people will go back to what their agreement was in the beginning of the marriage. We agreed to this. Well, understanding, when you made that agreement, you were not in the midst of a pandemic, probably, right? You were probably not in the midst of dealing with COVID-19.
Right.
So going back to the beginning and what you agreed upon, even though it's understandable, it's not relevant because conditions and situations have changed. Okay, so now we go to this idea of, now, what can we control? What can
Right.
we agree upon as a married couple? So I don't want to force my spouse to do something that makes them uncomfortable. So now what can we do? What can we do? Right. So I think that would become the goal, is to, as a couple, work out what you can do, what you are both willing to do comfortably
The
to
follow-up
make
to that
sure.
question is, if her decision is fear-based, should she seek therapy? So the decision
That's
to no longer work in the healthcare field because of COVID, if it's fear-based.
I think that's a tough one to answer, yes or no, because we are in the midst of a pandemic. Um, clearly, this person has been affected by the pandemic. But who are we to say that her fear is irrational or unwarranted? So I don't think it comes with a simple yes or no answer. Is there a problem that needs to be solved? Yes. Um, and this is where the idea of collaborative problem solving that I mentioned earlier comes in. The husband and the wife need to identify the problem together. The problem isn't that she won't work. The problem is that without her working, they don't have enough finances to make ends meet. So there are multiple ways that they can collaboratively solve that problem. They can work together to solve that problem. One of which is not her going back into the healthcare industry. There are other ways that she can help provide for the family, or other things that he can do to provide for the family to solve this problem.
Right. I think it's about
And
not using that phrase I used earlier, being dichotomous in thinking will always lead to greater problem, right? So if the thought is we cannot make it unless she goes back into the hospital or back into the healthcare industry, we are not going to make it. That's very black and white thinking. That's very all or nothing thinking, which is always, we would use the phrase distorted cognitively when we think that way. There may be other options that they just have to sit down and think about and consider and brainstorm together. Whenever I hear the phrase fear-based, I think that I'm hearing a question from a person who's like a believer, a person who's in the church. I think that language is very prevalent, this fear-based, right, way of thinking and talking and speaking about things. So I would say this, if I'm right about my belief with that question and that phrase fear-based, I would say that be careful not to push someone or not to judge someone because their level of faith is not where yours is.
Or their understanding of the fear isn't the same.
Exactly. So I would say that's important too, especially within a marriage, because the goal is to never diminish somebody or to make somebody feel like they're less than, or that that's never the goal. When you think about marriage, you think about the concept of team. So how can we work together as the team?
Mm-hmm.
So if this is an area of concern for one of my teammates, then how can we collaboratively work together to fix this problem that we have, which is right now, it sounds like maybe, not having two income household, right? So how can we work through this as a team and not attack each other?
I think both of you pretty much kind of answered it, and overall in the whole conversation, addressing the situation. And is it fear or is it caution? Because I mean, millions of people now are not doing things that they were once doing because of COVID. That's perfectly natural. Understanding that the feelings are natural, and being able to have both people in the relationship understand that, and then maybe work to, like you mentioned, Dr. Jackson, a common goal. And as you mentioned, Joe, maybe you can talk about your finances, what you can cut out, like you mentioned, maybe cutting out cable for a moment, or cutting out certain luxury items for a moment, until this all, I always say, this is going to pass. This too shall pass. That's another Christian statement, right? This too shall pass. So if we can accept that this is just a temporary state that we're all in, addressing it one way or the other. And if you're in a relationship where you can find time to address it, it's temporary.
Right.
Even if it's not going back to the healthcare job, this whole moment is all temporary. And just getting through the hurdle. be it through spiritual, be it through whatever mechanisms that you have, deal with that. And I think you can calm the waters a little bit with that. Going to therapy, if that's an option, that's an
It
expense
is.
unless you have it covered under insurance, right? So you
Right.
consider that
Right.
too, don't you?
You're right. It definitely is an option. It if going back to that question, if it's fear and it's to the point where it's fear and it's leading to like agoraphobia, so it's more like not just the wife doesn't want to go back into the hospital, but it's more like the wife doesn't want to leave the house, right? Like at all, because the fear is so great, it has become paralyzing to her, right? Which would then lead us to believe that there is impairment right there.
Right.
Then yes, therapy would definitely be something to look into.
Without a doubt.
And there are support groups too, and sessions like this, things that give you a chance to be encouraged and inspired and look at it where, and I always say, I think in all of them, you're never alone. So not feeling like you're alone and isolated in whatever state of mind you're in at this current moment certainly helps. In terms of finances, um, once again, you're not alone. So discussing that and discussing your options together and maybe with a third party intervention of counseling is another choice. Let me look here. I think I see another question that I skipped past. Uh, it says, how do each of you deal with your own personal stresses? Oh, they're getting personal. How do each of you deal with your own personal stresses? Start with Joe.
Um, I leisure activity is probably the one that I recommend most and probably use the most. I play the guitar. I'm not any good at it. It's definitely a hobby. You'll never see me on stage anywhere, but it's enjoyable for me to sit down and just try to learn a new song. I've got two kids that enjoy pretending to play. They have their own guitars, so they'll leave mine alone. They can't play, but they're learning, they're practicing. We enjoy it together as a family. We smile, we laugh. Um, we have a lot of family time together. We try to watch a lot of TV, especially at the end of the night. Sitting down watching TV with the wife. It's mindless activity, really. My dad would always tell me that what I watch is an insult to my intelligence, and I would always laugh and tell him that's exactly what I'm looking for. I've been using my intelligence all day. My brain is tired. I don't want to have to think and to work. So entertainment, leisure activity. In the summertime, I'm much better at it than I am in the winter. Therapist hours are not good hours. And so, during the winter, I go to work close to dark and I get home and it's already dark. But in the summer, like I walk the dog, I go swimming with the kids, things like that. In a pre-pandemic world, I go to shows. I love going to concerts. I've been to hundreds of concerts. Those are the different ways to, and there's always, which is funny, I'm an introvert, but there's always someone that I'm doing these things with too. So, that human connection is really important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Dr. Jackson, how do you deal with stress?
For me, I would say one of the things that I use the most is comedy.
Yes, yes.
Comedy, stand-up comedy sitcoms, anything that can make me laugh, movies that have humor, lots of humor. So that's my first go-to, outside of using my own faith system and belief system in God. That would definitely be primary for me. But aside from that, it would definitely be comedy. It would definitely be time with family. So we'll have movie night. We just recently had a game night. So we just try to do things together. We visit family a lot. Dancing it's something that I love to do. Now pre-pandemic, my husband and I would go out dancing. We would make that our date night and just go out and have fun. During the pandemic, I think I may have said this in one of the series, we have gone around to family members' houses and we're in the car, we're still social distancing and we're just like blasting music and we're videotaping and we're going to family members' houses and we're having them dance, for us on camera. And so again, humor, because that's hilarious. And also dancing and music. So I think those are definitely my go-tos. And it's so important. I think also, I guess I would say, going out, actually during the pandemic, we've gone out walking way more as family together, having that time together. I think that was something that came up a lot in the beginning of the pandemic, is families having more time together, which I think is so needed. And it's definitely a plus to the situation that we're in. It's just being able, in some situations, we realize that not every home situation is like that. But for those families where they are able to have that healthy time together, that's so great. But that's one of the things that I have used as well. So going on walks with the, whether it's with the kids or, you know, as with my husband, by myself. So those are some of the things that I have done. Now, would I say I do it enough? No.
No.
And I think that's
Agreed.
something that we all can work on. There's oftentimes in session, Joe, I'll raise my hand. I'm talking to a client and I'm saying, you know, humans need to do whatever. I'll fill in the blank. And I'm like raising my hand saying, I am no exception, right? So I think that's important that the people that we are talking to and working with, that they understand that we are all a work in progress and we're all working to be our best selves and to take care of ourselves.
I think
And then
actually
for
that's a
me,
good
I
point.
would say, don't I get a chance? I want to talk about
Go ahead,
mine.
go, Gail, go.
I want to talk about my stress, how I relieve my stress.
Go.
You know what? I'm just having fun with you, Joe, for sure. But no, I do. I pray. I read my Bible. I love Christian and gospel music. It depends on the setting. If I'm lower than others, then I like upbeat gospel. If I'm somewhat okay, then I like the little monotone Christian. You know the difference culturally, if you know what I'm talking about. I love helping others. And to me, that deflects of anything that I'm personally dealing with. When I look at other people who may be dealing with far more, which is probably most people, far more that I'm dealing with, helping them helps me. It's therapeutic, and I love to see a smile on the face of anything that I've contributed to. Family for sure. I'm thankful to have a peaceful home life. And that does certainly make a difference when you're at home, living with people that you love, you care about, and you get along with. So be it laughing, be it silence, be it whatever you're doing, cooking together, whatever, that certainly brings me joy and peace. So those are my main things. And being thankful. When I think about the number of things that I'm thankful for, I tend to forget some of the things that I'm dealing with. Okay,
Mhm.
that's it. Joe, I'm sorry. I've
No,
messed
no,
with you
no,
two or three times today, didn't I?
no.
That's because you're the guy here, so I like you to feel real relaxed and comfortable.
It's all good. No, but I was just going to piggyback off of what Dr. Jackson said. And sometimes it's our clients that actually notify us that we're stressed, you know, sitting in session and listening to some of the things that they're talking about. And they're like, well, I've got this problem and that problem, and this is happening, that's happening. And it's like, you know what? So do I. I think I need to do a little better job taking care of myself. You know, sometimes our clients almost are like a mirror of ourselves. And, you know, they help us as much as we help them sometimes.
I think that was the last question that was in the chat. So I do want to, we're coming close to the end. I don't want men to leave feeling, I hope they receive something out of this. But if you can both take maybe a minute or so to talk directly to the man who is under stress right now, more than just casual, I mean, you know, true hard stress. Can you talk to them directly? Either one who would like to start is fine.
I would start and say you do not need to be alone. It is okay. Struggles are real. Struggle is normal. Life is hard. You know, reach out to someone. Doesn't have to be a therapist, a family member, a friend, someone, a coworker, someone that you trust that will listen to you and spend a moment with you in the safest way possible. Current COVID conditions, you know, and learn some new skills. You know, talk to someone that can teach you just a different strategy than what you're doing right now. What you're doing right now is the best that you know how to do, and that's good. But other people have other ideas, so reach out to them so that you can learn new ideas.
Good. Dr. Jackson.
Um, More specifically, I would say get a try to work to establish a couple of things. So work, if you don't already have this in place, work to identify one or two people that you can trust with like absolutely anything, right? And if those one or two people do not exist or you don't feel that, then I would say absolutely reach out to a therapist, because with a therapist, you're getting someone who is going to be able to be there for you and listen and help you process things one on one, right? And because of our ethics and our respect for confidentiality, that would stay within the therapeutic session. Okay, so it's not getting back to other people. Um, the only exception to that, of course, and we're not going to go here tonight. We don't have the time, but would, of course, would be self harm, right? Or
Mhm.
harming other people. But if safety is not, if you're not harming yourself or someone else, and we're really just talking about stressors and things of that nature, then a therapist is the absolutely, next best thing to like a best friend or a close family member who you may not have in place. So that would be one. The second one I would say is, actually, this was shared with me by my husband, actually, was to seek out an accountability team, right? So a group of other men
Mhm.
who are in similar situations or have similar lifestyles. Okay. So if that means you're a single man, then surround yourself with other single men. If you're a married man, then surround yourself with other married men. If you're a married man with children, then identify those persons who may be in your circle already that you can hang out with, and they can hold you accountable. You can go to them with some problems. Maybe you're not getting as personal as like that one or two best friends, right? But you still have someone to go to who you can hold accountable.
Mhm.
Then maybe you widen your circle even more, and you have, this is the third thing, then you have other people that you can just hang out with. Get out the house. If you're single and you're not getting out and you're not making time for yourself and just to laugh and have fun, laughter is good for the soul, right? It's good for the body. It's good for our mental health. So make sure that you're getting out and you're just laughing, not even talking about anything serious, right? So these are not those accountability partners. These are just people that you can just relax and hang out and have fun, and enjoy life with, right? And connecting with on a very lighthearted way. So I think those things, sometimes when men are thinking that they have to hold so much in, that they forego and they neglect these other areas of life that are really important and healthy for them. So I would encourage men to definitely do those key things, to see if that would help improve their ability to manage stress better.
Very good. Thank you. Well, our time is up. We did it. Very good. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much, Joe, for being our special guest. Joe Lilly, once again, licensed social worker, did an excellent job giving advice for other men. And as usual, Dr. Jackson, we appreciate you. This is the end of this series, but this is not the end of our mental health programming, because we found it to be very beneficial. So we are going to continue it at least on a monthly basis. So I encourage you to go to novilibrary.org, our website, to find out more about our future programming. Dr. Jackson will continue to be with us, and we're going to invite you back too, Joe, if you agree to come back again. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. I'd love to be back.
But I encourage everyone to keep the faith. I always say this too will pass. It will get better. Better days are ahead. If you don't see it tomorrow, it's going to come. So just we all keep the faith that things are going to get better, and it will. So have a good night, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.